Okay. Check it. Darwinism. First published Friday, August 22, 2004, 2004. Substantive revision. Monday, May 6th, 2024. 20 years. That's crazy. Darwinism designates a distinctive form of evolutionary explanation for the history and diversity of life on Earth. Its original formula is provided in the first edition of On the Origin of Species in 1859. This entry first formulates Darwin's Darwinism in terms of 6 philosophically distinctive themes. One, they're going Roman on this shit. 1, probability and chance. 2, the nature, power, and scope of selection. 3, adaptation and teleology. 4, the interpretation of the concept of species. 5, the tempo and mode of evolutionary change. And 6, the role of altruism and group selection in the explanation of morality. Both Darwin and his critics recognized that his approach to evolution was distinctive on each of these topics, and it remains true that even though Darwinism has developed in many ways unforeseen by Darwin, its proponents and critiques continue to differentiate it from other approaches in evolutionary biology by focusing on these themes. This point is illustrated in the second half of the entry by looking at current debates in the philosophy of evolutionary biology on these 6 themes. So we're going to be following these. Okay. Probability and chance, right? The randomness of the universe and future. The nature, power, and scope of selection. A little bit like godhood, if you think about it. Adaptation and teleology. I'm actually kind of interested in what that, if I even get that far, actually. Holy shit. Oh no, dude. I don't even, because we got to get to Darwin first. I mean, we could skip. I'm okay with skipping and just getting to the philosophical problems of today. But then I would have to, okay, if I skip, let's see. Let's just scroll real quick. So then that's Darwin and his fucking whatever. 3.1. Oh god, it's so long. This is just 3.1. Oh, this is just 3.1. Oh, and then that's 3.2. Fuck. I mean, it's doable, but the whole thing isn't doable. I gotta pick one. Fuck it, we ball. The 6 core philosophical problems today. Theories need both essences and histories. Stephen J. Good, 2002. That's when I was born. So reads the heading of the very first section of the first chapter of Gould's monumental The Structure of Evolutionary Theory, opening with a subtle reading of an exchange of letters in 1863 between paleontologist Hugh Falconer and Charles Darwin. Good eventually explains what he has in mind by the section heading. In short, the structure of evolutionary theory combines enough stability for coherence with enough change to keep in a keen mind in a perpetual mode of search and challenge. Enough stability for coherence with enough change to keep in a keen mind in a perpetual mode of search and challenge. Good Hood, of course, was both an unabashed admirer of Charles Darwin and one of the most outspoken critics of the Darwinian synthesis. We will be using both of his account of the essence of Darwinism in part one of this magnum opus in his arguments for a revised and expanded evolutionary theory in its part two as touchstones and targets. In the preceding section of the essay, we organize our discussion of the problems that Darwin's allies had with Darwinism around 6 issues. 1, the role of chance as a factor in evolutionary theory and the theory's apparently probabilistic nature. 2, the nature of selection. 3, the question of whether selection/adaptation explanations are teleological. 4, the ontological status of species and the epistemological status of species concepts. Sorry, I'm also combing up my hair while doing this. So sorry if you hear a Tom and Jerry scream or some shit. 5, the implications of Darwin's insistence on the slow and gradual nature of evolutionary change. 6, the impact of natural selection on ethics and altruistic behavior. We claim that one very good reason for continuing to characterize one dominant approach to evolutionary biology, that represented by the so-called neo-Darwinian synthesis, as Darwinism is that its proponents side with Darwin on these issues to the extent that Darwin had a clear position on them, and on many less fundamental ones besides. That in itself is remarkable, but it is more so because the Darwinian position on each of these issues is under as much pressure from non-Darwinian evolutionary biologists today as it was in the wake of the origin. It is not surprising, given the situation we have just categorized it, that historians and philosophers of biology have made significant contributions to the discussion, especially in pointing out the underlying philosophical issues and conceptual confusions and ambiguities that stand in the way of resolving the issues at hand in their historical origins. It is our conviction that a full understanding of the underlying philosophical disagreements on these questions will only come from a patient historical study of how the synthesis positions on these various issues and those of their critics arose. That we cannot do here. Rather, in what follows, we will simply be presupposing certain answers to these questions of historical origin. The list of references at the end of the essay include a number of excellent pieces of the work on this subject for those who share our convictions about this importance. Yeah. Why do I have to have such a nappy head? 3.1, section 3.1, the role of chance in evolutionary theory. Jesus Christ, children. Oh no, bro, I think I just broke. Can I put it back in? I'm sorry, guys, you're gonna have to listen to this. Can I put it back in, or is it forever? I think it's forever fucked. Guess I'm fucked. It's too late. I can't push it back in because then it will hurt on the other side of my finger. What if I comb it through my hair? Will it come out? It doesn't seem like it's necessarily coming out, but I can't bend it like the other ones. Okay. You know what? All right, you know what? Fuck it. Now it doesn't even want to come out. Just stay there if you want. Just be a part of the party if you want. Let's begin with the language Darwin uses when he first sketches his theory at the beginning of the 4th chapter of The Origin. Can it then be thought improbable, seeing that the variations useful to a man have undoubtedly occurred, that other variations useful in some way to each being in the great complex battle of life should sometimes occur in the course of thousands of generations. If such do occur, can we doubt, remembering that more individuals are born than can possibly survive, that individuals having any advantage, however slight, over others would have the best chance of surviving and procreating their kind? Unlike Darwin's contemporaries, and despite Darwin's own apparent hesitation, the founders of this synthesis of Mendelian genetics and Darwinian selection theory, Sewall Wright, Ronald Fisher, and J.B.S. Holden, were entirely comfortable with the selection theory formulated in such terms. This was a substantial shift in the presentation of evolution from a reluctantly probabilistic picture to a thoroughly mathematicized, statistical, and probabilistic theory, which occurred in several decades after the publication of The Origin. On this issue, contemporary Darwinism has adopted an approach every bit as chancy as that of Darwin. Note one clear statement of the principle of natural selection from the philosophical literature. If A is better adapted than B to their mutual environment, E, then probably A will have a greater reproductive success than B in E. Okay. Simple enough to understand. Dude, I hate combing my hair. Dude, I also don't even think I'm going to be able to read all of this. Holy shit. The theory trades pervasively in probability. Given the fact that evolutionary biologists, especially insofar as they take their cues from population genetics, deal with large populations conceived as gene pools, think of evolution as long-run changes in the frequencies of different combinations of genes from generation to generation. Sorry. It's clear that, in the sense of making use of probabilistic or statistical reasoning, chance permeates contemporary Darwinism. The models of population biology provide a means of assigning probabilities to various outcomes. Given information about population size, rates of mutation and migration, themselves given as averages and estimates, that is, as Darwin notes, being relatively better adapted increases an organism's chances, i.e., increases its probability of leaving viable offspring. It does not guarantee it, since natural selection is a stochastic process. Darwinians from Darwin to the present rightly characterize it in terms of influencing the chances of a given outcome, given variables such as selection pressure, population size, or mutation rates. Conceptual confusion arises, however, from the fact that chance and randomness are often contrasted, not with deterministic or non-probabilistic outcomes, but with selected outcomes. The evolutionary process, as Darwin understood it, involves both the generation of variation and a process producing a differential perpetuation of variation. One way to think about chance in Darwinism is in relation to the logical space of alternatives by means of the following variation grid. Variations: generation, perpetuation, fitness biased, Lamarck, as a grade, Darwin, neutralism, not fitness based, Darwin, Asa, Gregg. I don't even understand what the fuck I'm looking at. Generation, perpetuation, Darwin, Lamarck, neutralism, On the second sense of chance, what seems to make a theory chancy is the fact that generation of variation and perpetuation of variation have both been, for some of these theories, independent of future utility or fitness. As we see from the grid, the contrast on both scores is found in the evolutionary philosophy of Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Lamarck Lamarck's is a materialist argument against the variation in nature being a matter of chance. On the Lamarckian view, variations arise in an organism as a direct response to environmental stress or demand, giving rise to a stimulus, which in turn elicits a physiological response, which can finally be passed on via reproduction to offspring. Variations are not chance or random, since they are an appropriate response to an environmental stress. Here, chance signals a lack of relation or connection to adaptive needs. The concept of random variation is today often used as a synonym for chance variation in precisely this latter sense. Here are two examples of this notion of chance or randomness. Here are two examples of this notion of chance or randomness as used by contemporary Darwinians. Also, hair falling on the floor. I got hair everywhere, baby. Hair everywhere. Hair everywhere, baby. Hair everywhere. Mutation is a random process with respect to the adaptive needs of the species. Therefore, mutation alone, uncontrolled by natural selection, will result in the breakdown and eventual extinction of life, not an adaptive or progressive evolution. Thus, the production of variations may be a chance process in that there are a number of possible outcomes with assignable probabilities, but it is also a chance process in the sense that probability assigns are not biased by adaptive needs or fitness. Referring now to perpetuation rather than generation of variation, when John Beatty describes random drift as changes in frequencies of variations due to chance in the following passage, he presumably has something like a contrast with changes in frequencies due to selection in mind. In Darwin's scheme of things, recall, chance events and natural selection were consecutive rather than alternative stages of the evolutionary process. There was no question as to which was more important at a particular stage. But now that we have the concept of random drift taking over, where random variation leaves off, we're faced with just such a question. That is, given chance variations, are further changes in the frequencies of those variations more a matter of chance or more a matter of natural selection? Notice that in the above quote, we first get a substitution of random for chance in the phrase random variation and chance variation. And then at least the suggestion that the concept of random drift can be categorized as changes in frequency of variations due to chance, where the contrast class consists of similar changes due to natural selection. With respect to the generation of variation, Chapter 5 of On the Origin of Species opens with the following apology. I have hitherto sometimes spoken as if the variations, so common and multiform in organic beings under domestication, and in a lesser degree in those in a state of nature, had been due to chance. This, of course, is a wholly incorrect expression, but it serves to acknowledge plainly our ignorance of the cause of each particular variation. Here, Darwin is noting that, though to speak of chance variations may seem to be citing chance as the cause of the variations, it is in fact simply acknowledging that they appear to have no assignable cause. But it is important to keep historical context in mind here. Whether Darwin himself ever flirted with the idea of directed variation or not, he was acutely aware of two views from which he needed to be distinguished, very different from each other, but both hiding to the view that variations arose for a purpose. The most widely shared alternative was that found in natural theology. To quote the Reverend William Paley's Natural Theology regarding a beautiful instance of adaptation, a confirmation so happy was not the gift of chance. Likewise, among Darwin's followers, the American botanist Asa Gray, in an essay entitled Natural Selection and Natural Theology, used the same contract to advise Darwin against the notion of chance variation. We should advise Mr. Darwin to assume, in the philosophy of his hypothesis, that variation had been led along certain beneficial lines. Gray here is insisting that since Darwin admits that using the term chance merely signals ignorance of the true cause, and since the pervasive adaptations in nature suggest design, Darwin should avoid the suggestion that variations are due to chance in the sense of absence of design. This introduces yet a third sense of chance that has been instrumental in the interpretation of evolutionary theory. My hair feels more like I feel like I can scroll my fucking fingers to it more. Anyways, Darwin, in fact, never refers to chance variations in the origin, though he occasionally will note that if a beneficial variation chances, i.e., happens to appear, come on, right? I'm a lotion. Oh, it will be favored by selection. What Darwin has in mind, however, is clear from his concluding marks in his chapter of Laws of Variation. Whatever the cause may be in each slight difference in the offspring from their parents, and the cause in each must exist, and the cause of each must exist, it is the steady accumulation through natural selection of such differences when beneficial to the individual that give rise to all the important modifications of structure. Whatever the cause of the generation of variation may be, the role of selection is to accumulate those already present variations that happen to be beneficial. A process that, while probabilistic, is not at all independent of fitness, hence not chancy in our second sense. As Betty put it, the generation of variations and their selection are consecutive processes. But to call the generation a variation a chance process is to use chance in either the second or third sense, meaning either that such generation is independent of the future utility of variations for the organism, or that it is not by design, not for some end. There are, therefore, at least three forms of chance at play in contemporary evolutionary theory: an invocation of probabilistic or statistical inferences, an invocation of processes that act independently of current or future fitness, and an invocation of the absence of design. To these we might add, as mentioned above, chance as ignorance of causes, and chance as historical contingency. Though we lack the space to discuss either of those notions further. Sorry, hold on. Where I live off it. To these, we might add, as mentioned above, chance as ignorance of causes and chance as historical contingency, though we lack the space to discuss either of those notions further, bringing the total to 5. Ebel drops the notion of probabilistic or statistical inference and adds the idea, less relevant in evolutionary context, that chance can refer to uncaused events. See analysis. Oh, how long do I? Okay. I'm just reading section 3.1. I thought I was gonna read. Yeah, dude, fuck that shit. Dude, now I'm just fucking lost. Okay, I know where I am. One further example can illustrate how all this interacts in the broader context of contemporary evolutionary theory. For much such examples, see the contributions of Ramsey and Pence. Here, a champion of the neutral theory of molecular evolution characterizes his position. Let me just check real quick. Okay, cool. The great majority of evolutionary changes at the molecular level, DNA, do not result from the Darwinian natural selection acting on advantageous mutations, but rather from random fixation of selectively neutral or very neatly neutral mutants through random genetic drift, which is caused by random sampling of gametes in finite populations. Here, it will be noticed, the focus is not on the generation of variations, but on the perpetuation of variations. The contrast between a random sampling of gametes that leads to the fixation of selectively neutral allies and natural selection favoring advantageous variations. That is the contrast between chance and fitness-based or fitness-biased processes are now being used to distinguish different means of perpetuating certain variations. We are contrasting two sampling processes. Drift samples without concern for adaptation, selection samples discriminately on the basis of differences in fitness. Just give me 1 second real quick. Yeah. Both samples are probabilistic, of course, but that in no way obviates the above contrast. However, as Betty has pointed out, it was quite common until fairly recently to characterize natural selection in such a way as to make it almost indistinguishable from random drift. Numerous accounts of fitness characterize the fitness of a genotype as defined by its relative contribution to the gene pool of future generations, the genotype contributing the larger percentage being the fitter. But of course, that could easily be the result of a random, non-fitness biased sampling process, which organisms would be declared fitter by this method by this method might having nothing to do with natural selection. In order to provide a proper characterization of the role of chance in evolutionary change, then it is critical to provide a more robust and sophisticated account of fitness. Further information, see the entry on fitness. This in turn requires that we discuss the conceptual network that includes the notions of adaptation and natural selection, to which we will turn shortly. For now, let us assume that there is a way of characterizing fitness such that there is a substantial empirical question of what role indiscriminate sampling of genotypes or phenotypes play in evolutionary change. This issue was first placed squarely before evolutionary biologists by Theodore Wright in the early 1930s. As Wright pointed out, genes that are not neutral with respect to the fitness can, due to the stochastic nature of any process of sampling from a population, increase their representation from one generation to the next. The likelihood of this happening goes up as an effective population size goes down. Since Wright imagined that a quite typical scenario in evolutionary change was for species to be broken up into relatively small, relatively isolated populations, with significantly more breeding within the between dims, the likelihood that such neutral genotypes could become fixed at a relatively high levels was significant. Though he gradually toned down this aspect of his work, a significant school of mathematical population genetics in the 1960s and 70s took these ideas and ran with them, developing a neutralist approach to evolutionary change. This is the position characterized by Kimura, one of the most eloquent defenders in the passage quoted above. Whether or not such a process plays a significant role in evolution is not a philosophical issue, but it is highly relevant to whether evolutionary biology should be seen as predominantly Darwinian. For if any view is central to Darwinism, it is that the evolutionary process is predominantly guided by the fitness biasing force of natural selection, acting on variations that arise by chance. It is to natural selection and related concepts that we now turn. That's not where I'm turning. I'm going to be turning over in my bed while eating Taco Bell and watching YouTube. Thank you guys for reading with me. I love you guys and can't wait to continue this journey.